This is the GoPro Hero 7, and today I'm going to show you what settings to use to get the best video quality out of it. The very first thing I do when I get a new camera is test. I test it in good conditions, I test it in bad conditions, I test all the modes on it, I test all the settings, all the picture profiles, I test everything. And one thing about GoPros, the footage either looks good or it looks bad. So after all the testing that I did, let's jump into the camera so I can show you the settings that I use. Okay, now that we are in the GoPro and you are in video mode, you can hit the little settings tab at the bottom. And the first thing they ask you is the resolution. I pretty much always shoot in 4K. If I know I'm not going to be slowing it down, then I'll shoot in 24 frames a second. But if I may slow it down in post, or it's something I might want slow motion on, then I'll leave it in 60. But that's up to you. Just know that anything, the higher the frame rate, the less light you're letting in. So if you try to shoot the slow motion in dark, you're losing light. If you go to 2.7K, you can shoot up to 120 frames a second, but stabilization is not supported. And if you go to 1080, you can shoot up to 240 frames per second, but stabilization is not supported. If you go down to 120, you have standard stabilization. And if you go to 60, you have Hypersmooth. So basically, pretty much I'll always leave it in 4K 60 if I'm doing slow motion, and 4K 24 frames a second for anything else. Okay, in 4K 60, the only field of view that you have available is wide. So we're gonna go ahead and click wide. If you shoot anything lower than 60 frames a second in 4K, then you will be able to do super view. So if super view is something that you want or need, you have to go below 60 frames a second in 4K to get it. But I don't use super view even if it was an option in 4K 60, so that's not a problem. Okay, low light won't be available because we're going to be using protune. Stabilization is on auto. If you cannot do Hypersmooth, it will automatically go to normal stabilization, which is pretty much the same as the GoPro Hero 6. So with that in auto, you want to turn on protune, and protune is going to allow you to change all of the rest of the settings. For the shutter speed, we're going to set it to auto. Now normally I wouldn't say auto for shutter speed when it comes to cameras, but after all the testing that I did, this is where I get the best results, and I will tell you why later. So the shutter speed is in auto, EV compensation to 0. White balance. You definitely want to set the white balance because the GoPro is constantly trying to make sure that it's achieving the best white balance, and so it might fluctuate throughout the video. I usually set it to native, or I will set it to 5500 Kelvin because that's pretty much in the middle, it's daylight balanced. If you go too low, then it's going to be very blue, and if you go too high, it's going to be very orange. So for most situations, I just leave it in 5500. If you want to set it specifically for whatever scene you're in, then do that, but it really doesn't matter as long as it's set. Just try to get as close as what it really is in the camera. Now what I found through testing, even if you set the white balance to one of these custom settings, the GoPro will still apply its own color. So if you go to native, you pretty much get the full sensor readout of the colors and it won't affect it in any way. So I usually just leave it in native. But if you like the color that the GoPro provides in the regular modes, just go ahead and stick it to about 5500, and that'll be pretty good for most situations. So set the white balance as close as you can in camera. 5500 is pretty much the safe zone, and if you really want neutral colors, set it to native. ISO minimum, that's going to allow us to set the minimum ISO level, and we pretty much always want this to stay at 100. Maximum ISO level. If it's during the daytime, I set the minimum and the maximum to 100. If it's daytime, we got light, there's no reason why the ISO should go over 100 because now we're going to be decreasing the quality for no reason. So I'm going to set the minimum and maximum to 100. Now if it's darker outside, then the highest I would go with ISO is probably about 400. You're kind of pushing it with 800, and anything above that, you really don't even want to touch any of this. So stay under 400 if you can. If it's daytime, you got like 100 all the way. Now for sharpness, we're gonna set it to low. And I know that might not sound good, but when you add the extra sharpening, it just looks bad. It kind of gives like a little black outline to everything that's in the shot, and that's very unnatural. Even though it might look like it's adding more detail, it's really not. It's just making it look bad. So that's one telltale sign that you're shooting on a cheap camera or you're shooting on the GoPro, something like that. It's like extra sharp, like it's trying too hard. So go ahead and turn that all the way down, and if you need any sharpening, add it in post. Now for color profiles, I shoot in flat, but if you like the GoPro color, shoot in GoPro, it doesn't matter. If you want to color grade after, shoot flat. If you're not color grading, use GoPro color. The rest of it is just audio settings. If you want the raw audio file, you can turn that on, and the mics if you want to have the mic set for wind noise or anything like that, but it doesn't matter if you're not using audio. So to recap, for resolution, I always shoot at the highest resolution I can for the frame rate that I need. So if I need 120 frames a second, then I go to the next lowest resolution that'll get me that, and so on and so forth. But 4K 60 is usually where it's at. Unless I know I'm not using slow motion, then it's 4K 24 frames a second. Field of view is wide. That's the only option in 4K 60, and I corrected distortion in post. Low light is not available. Stabilization is always on auto. Protune is always on to give me the automatic shutter speed. And native white balance, or set it to custom white balance, but always set it, never leave it on auto. ISO minimum is always 100. Max is always 100 in daytime. Low light, I'll take it to 400, maybe 800 if you just need it. Sharpness is always set to low. Color is flat, or GoPro color if you're not gonna color grade. And if you need a separate audio track, you can go ahead and turn that on, and I pretty much leave the mics on auto, and that's it. Now the most important part to the settings is that you want to manually set the metering spot. So wherever the subject is in your shot, you want to make sure you hold it until the little square pops up, and then lock it. And that'll stop your exposure from jumping around on you throughout the video. That's gonna keep your shutter speed locked, that's gonna keep the ISO locked, and everything like that. So if your subject was right here, you want to set the exposure on this square and lock it. Hit the check mark. Now if you go back to your settings, you'll notice that the shutter speed is not available, the ISO is not available, and the ISO max is not available, because the exposure is locked. You can't change it because it's locked. So if you move it around, you can lock it. Move it around, lock it. Locking the exposure will make sure your camera settings do not change while you're shooting until you want them to. So definitely go ahead and do that. Always remember to do that. So if there's anything else that you guys want to see about the GoPro, just let me know and I'll try to make a video on it. And I hope this video was helpful. Please give me a thumbs up, like, subscribe, follow me on Instagram, and I will see you guys next time.